she reported to police just after midnight. She had bruises on her back, visible wounds on her legs. Her right eye was swollen and discolored. And according to the police report filed that night, she told officers that her husband had struck her in the face and dragged her along the driveway. She was the mother of his children. She was a law school graduate. She was one of the smartest women in any room she had ever walked into. And yet, she sat inside the police station in the dark hours of a Texas night, trembling, documented, and desperate for someone to believe her. Her name was Tara Coronado. And the men she was accusing, the men police would arrest 2 weeks later, was Ed Cunningham, a former NFL player, a corporate executive, a man who stood 6 feet 7 inches tall and weighed 275 pounds. A man who, according to court records and investigative reporting, had been hurting her for 15 years. And what happened next was something that nobody who heard this story could have ever seen coming. Before we go any further, we would love to know where in the world you are watching this from. Drop your location in the comments right now, we genuinely read every single one. And if you are new here, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Because to understand what Ed Cunningham became, you have to understand what he was when Tara first met him. The year was 1997. Tara Coronado was a young woman in her late 20s attending the University of Texas School of Law. She had not arrived there easily. She had grown up in a trailer park in New Mexico. She had clawed her way out through sheer intelligence and determination, serving in the Peace Corps before earning her law degree. By any measure, Tara Coronado was extraordinary. She was described by those who knew her as a force of nature, sharp, competitive, warm, and deeply committed to the people she loved. She was exactly the kind of woman who did not seem like someone who would ever find herself trapped. And that, as we will come to understand, is precisely the point. Ed Cunningham walked into her law school class as a guest speaker that year, and from the moment he entered the room, he commanded it. He was almost 6 feet 8 inches tall. He had a shock of sideswept brown hair and an open, magnetic smile. He had been an All-American football player for the University of Texas Longhorns, a celebrated athlete in a state where football is practically a religion. He had gone on to play briefly in the NFL, signing with the New York Giants before injuries derailed his playing career. He had then reinvented himself, attending Texas Tech University School of Law, becoming an attorney, working as a sports agent, and eventually building a career that spanned international law, corporate consulting, and business development across multiple continents. By the time Tara met him, according to investigative reporting by the Marshall Project and long reads, Ed Cunningham was in the middle of his first divorce and moving in what reporters would later describe as influential circles. He was the kind of man that Texas called successful. And Tara, like many people who encountered him, was swept off her feet. Their initial romance moved quickly. He was charming. He was present. He made her feel, according to accounts she later gave to friends and to a court-appointed psychologist, seen and valued in a way she had not experienced before. But according to Tara's own account, and to police records that would later become part of the public record, the warmth did not last long. Within months of their relationship beginning, according to what Tara told authorities, things turned violent. One night, she went with friends to a party at his house and saw him with another woman. The argument that followed ended, according to Tara's account to police, with Cunningham throwing her against a bathroom sink and choking her. Her brother Sam, who was living with her at the time, saw her bruises when she came home. He called the police himself. He convinced his sister to speak with officers. And Tara did speak with them. But then something happened that would define the next 15 years of her life. She found out she was pregnant. According to detailed reporting by the Marshall Project, Tara reconciled with Ed Cunningham after discovering she was carrying his child. She moved into his stone 2-story home in Bee Cave, a wealthy suburb nestled in the hill country outside Austin, Texas. When she was 6 months pregnant, they married. And for a time, she believed it would be different. She told herself it was a new chapter. She settled into home life. She had 3 more children with him over the following 6 years. They became, to the outside world, a picture of success. Ed shifted from sports law into other business ventures. He eventually became CEO of U.S. Renewable Energy Group. In 2001, he even launched a short-lived campaign for a United States Senate seat. they moved in influential political and social circles. Their children attended expensive private schools. Tara coached their sports teams. From the outside, everything looked exactly the way a powerful man wanted it to look. But according to Tara's accounts, given to friends, to investigators, and to a court-appointed psychologist during the custody battle that would eventually follow, the volatility never stopped. She told people that throughout those years, the physical harm recurred. That he would, at various times, hit her, bite her, destroy her clothes and personal keepsakes. She described it to a psychologist as sporadic, happening amid happier stretches when he would dress up as Santa Claus for the children and become what she called, with a bitterness that is hard to miss, quote, overdo it Ed. According to her account, she justified staying. She told herself, and later told a journalist, quote, it's not every day. We had a nice life. That is what abuse does to a person. It does not announce itself as a trap. It builds one slowly, comfort by comfort, until leaving feels more dangerous than staying. Ed Cunningham has denied ever physically harming Tara Coronado. He has stated publicly that he always avoided physical contact with her except, in his words, to deflect her actions or restrain her. His version of events and hers are in direct conflict. But as we will soon see, the documented evidence would begin to tell its own story. The marriage fractured slowly and then all at once. By late 2011, according to reporting from the Marshall Project, Tara discovered that Ed had secretly purchased a second house across town, a separate home where he had been living part of the time, sometimes while claiming to be working abroad. He had been having an affair. And the life that Tara had held together for more than a decade, the life she had sacrificed her career for, the life she had endured so much to protect, collapsed around her. Divorce proceedings began. And almost immediately, the situation became something far more serious than a marriage ending. According to court records and police documentation from the Bee Cave Police Department, on the night of May 10, 2013, late, after the children were asleep, an incident occurred at the family home. Tara Coronado arrived at the Bee Cave Police Station in the early hours of May 11. It was approximately 1 o'clock in the morning. The officers who received her documented what they observed in their report. There were lacerations and bruises on her back. Visible wounds on her legs. A swollen and discolored right eye. Photographs were taken. According to the police affidavit for the warrant of arrest and detention, Tara told officers that Ed had struck her in the right side of her face and had dragged her along the driveway. She also told police, according to that same report, that he had assaulted her many times over the past 15 years. She was no longer protecting him. She was done. And this time, she had the documentation to prove it. Ed Cunningham was arrested on May 24, 2013. He was charged with assault family violence, a Class A misdemeanor under Texas Penal Code. He posted a cash bond of $3,500 the following day. An emergency protective order was issued. And Tara Coronado, battered and finally free of the silence she had maintained for 15 years, believed that the legal system was about to deliver what she had come for, accountability. What she could not have anticipated was that the fight was only just beginning. And that the very system she had placed her hope in was about to turn on her in ways she had never imagined. Because here is where this story shifts into something that went beyond one family's private pain and became a story that revealed something deeply troubling about the way power operates in America. Ed Cunningham hired attorneys. Powerful attorneys. And the machinery of legal privilege began to move. According to reporting by the Austin Bulldog, a Texas investigative journalism outlet that spent years covering this case, nearly 3 years passed between Cunningham's arrest in May 2013 and any formal resolution of the criminal charge. 3 years. And when that resolution finally came, it did not come in the form of a conviction. On April 26, 2016, Ed Cunningham and the Travis County Attorney's Office signed what is known as a Deferred Prosecution Agreement, a DPA. The criminal charge was dismissed. No conviction was entered into the public record with the Texas Department of Public Safety. He walked away from an arrest, documented injuries, a police report, and a written confession embedded in the agreement itself, and he walked away without a criminal record. According to the Austin Bulldog's reporting, court filings in a related lawsuit stated that Cunningham's Deferred Prosecution Agreement, quote, contains his written confession. The standard DPA form used by the Travis County Attorney's Office, obtained by the Austin Bulldog, includes language stating that the defendant must sign to acknowledge, quote, I hereby voluntarily confess that they are true, referring to the allegations against them. Ed Cunningham signed that agreement. The charges were then dismissed. And Tara Coronado was not even given a complete copy of what the agreement actually said. According to the Austin Bulldog's reporting, she was misled about the full terms of the deal her abuser had struck with prosecutors. She had been the victim. She had reported it. She had been photographed. She had shown up at 1 o'clock in the morning with bruises that an officer documented with a camera. And the system handed the men she accused a quiet exit and kept her in the dark about the terms of his escape. Meanwhile, the divorce and custody proceedings were producing something even more difficult to watch. Because what happened in that Austin courtroom is something that advocates for survivors of domestic violence have described as a pattern, a deeply troubling, well-documented pattern in which the very act of reporting abuse is used against the woman who reported it. Ed Cunningham's legal team, according to the Marshall Project's reporting, portrayed Tara in court as vindictive, unstable, and manipulative. They argued that her abuse claims were fabricated in retaliation for his infidelity. A court-appointed therapist, whose fees were paid by Cunningham according to court documents, labeled Tara with a range of psychological diagnoses, including borderline personality disorder, and described her as hostile and defensive. The family court judge at the time, Judge Susan Shepard, opened one hearing by telling Tara directly, quote, "There is a huge amount of anger coming from you. You deny it and are obviously not recognizing how almost every piece of information you give the court is tinged by, tainted by, influenced by your overwhelming anger and hurt." She then suggested that a psychological evaluation might uncover an access to mental health condition in Tara. Let that sink in for a moment. A woman who had been documented by police with bruises, lacerations, and a swollen eye, a woman who had shown up to a police station alone in the middle of the night, was sitting in a courtroom being told that her anger was the problem. That her pain was distorting her perception. That the issue was not what had been done to her, but how she was responding to it. And the children, the 4 children she had raised, coached, cared for through 15 years of a marriage that had cost her almost everything, were at risk of being taken from her. The machinery of power was working exactly as powerful men have historically relied on it to work. Slowly. Quietly. And at devastating cost to the person with fewer resources. Within roughly 3 months of that court hearing, according to the Marshall Project's reporting, Ed Cunningham was awarded primary custody of the 3 boys. Tara Coronado, a law school graduate, a former Peace Corps volunteer, a woman who had dedicated more than a decade of her life to raising those children, was restricted to 4 hours of supervised visitation per week. She had to meet her own sons in 2-hour increments under the watch of a court-appointed supervisor. She paid $100 an hour for that supervisor out of the wages from her new administrative job. A year later, she lost custody of her daughter as well. Ed Cunningham had told her, according to her own court testimony, that he would take the children away, take the money away, and tell everyone she was unstable. According to Tara, he had made those threats to her face. And the court, whether intentionally or not, had handed him exactly the outcome he described. This is the part of the story where many people would have given up. Where the weight of it all, the legal fees, the isolation, the humiliation of supervised visits with your own children, the exhaustion of being disbelieved at every turn, would have broken most people into silence. And Tara Coronado was, by her own admission, struggling. She was angry. She was grieving. She sometimes acted in ways she later acknowledged were not her best moments, calling Ed's new partner names during exchanges, sending texts that swung between fury and desperation. She was, in every human sense of the word, a woman falling apart under enormous and unjust pressure. But she did not stop. And that decision, to keep going, to keep fighting, to refuse to accept the version of reality that powerful people with money were trying to construct around her, is the reason this story did not end in silence. Because while Tara was navigating the courts and the custody hearings and the supervised visitation, something else was happening that Ed Cunningham had not planned for. Journalists were paying attention. Investigators were looking. And the very tools of secrecy that had been used to protect him, the sealed deferred prosecution agreement, the closed-door proceedings, the NDAs and confidentiality clauses, were beginning to attract exactly the kind of scrutiny that powerful men fear most. The Austin Bulldog, a small but relentless investigative outlet based in Texas, began publishing a detailed series of reports on the case. Reporter Ken Martin documented the timeline. The arrest. The bond. The 3 years of delay. The DPA. The fact that Tara had not been shown the full terms of the agreement made on her behalf with the men who police believed had harmed her. The Austin Bulldog filed public information requests. They pushed for transparency. They made the case a matter of public record in ways that money and lawyers could not easily suppress. Simultaneously, Tara, armed with an attorney named Bill Alisher who specialized in government transparency, began filing open records requests with the Travis County Attorney's Office to obtain the deferred prosecution agreement that had been used to dismiss the charge against Cunningham. What followed was, according to the Austin Bulldog's reporting, a remarkable display of institutional resistance. The Travis County Attorney's Office, led at that time by David Escamilla, filed a lawsuit against Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton in an attempt to keep the DPA secret from the public. The office argued that such agreements should remain confidential. Think about what that means in plain terms. A prosecutor's office went to court, spent public resources going to court, to prevent a domestic violence victim from seeing the terms of the agreement that prosecutors had secretly made with the men she accused of harming her. Alisher, Tara's attorney, told the Austin Bulldog at the time, quote, that it was unconscionable to ask victims to endorse a prosecutor's deal with their abuser and mislead them about the complete contents of that deal. This battle over the DPA ultimately settled. On August 7, 2017, according to the Austin Bulldog's reporting, a settlement agreement was reached. Tara Coronado received an unredacted copy of the deferred prosecution agreement. The public fight she had waged, alongside a transparency attorney who, notably, received no fees from the settlement, had forced the record into the open. It was a small but significant victory. And it set a larger conversation in motion, one that would begin to pull the threads of this case far beyond Austin, Texas, and into a national discussion about how the legal system handles domestic violence, how money shapes justice, and how the act of survival is too often punished while the act of abuse is quietly managed away. By the time the Marshall Project published its landmark investigation into the Tara Coronado and Ed Cunningham case in July 2020, co-published with long reads and written by journalist Catherine Joyce, the story had already survived years of suppression. The piece was detailed, devastating, and meticulously sourced. It drew on police records, court transcripts, therapist reports, emails, and direct interviews with Tara herself, as well as with domestic violence experts and legal professionals who reviewed the evidence. The response from the public was significant. Because what the piece made clear was that what happened to Tara Coronado was not exceptional. It was, according to advocates and researchers cited in the investigation, a pattern, one that plays out in family courts across the United States with disturbing regularity. Women who report abuse and then fight for custody are frequently framed as unstable, vindictive, and manipulative. The very emotional responses that are natural consequences of surviving abuse, the anger, the desperation, the urgency, are weaponized against them in court. And when their abuser has more money, more access to paid therapists and attorneys, and more social credibility built on decades of public success, the system tends to tilt in his direction. Gina Lungwitz, director of the University of Texas School of Law's Domestic Violence Clinic, who assisted on Tara's case, told the Marshall Project something that has stayed with me since I first read this story. She said, quote, because she's such a force of nature, it's harder to believe that she would stay in a relationship that's violent. That is a sentence worth pausing on. Because it exposes one of the most persistent and dangerous myths about domestic abuse, the idea that the kind of person who stays in a harmful relationship is a passive, easily dominated person. The kind of person who does not seem like Tara Coronado. The kind of person who does not have a law degree and a resume that includes the Peace Corps. The kind of person who is easier to pity than to respect. And yet experts are consistent on this point. Women stay in abusive relationships for reasons that have nothing to do with weakness. They stay out of fear. They stay out of financial dependence that has been deliberately engineered by their abuser. They stay because leaving is statistically one of the most dangerous moments in an abusive relationship. They stay because they were pregnant. Because they believed it would change. Because the men who hurt them also dressed up as Santa Claus and made their children laugh. That is not weakness. That is what abuse actually looks like in real life, in real families, in real homes hidden behind real stone walls in wealthy Texas suburbs. Now here is where the story arrives at something that, for me, represents the clearest version of justice this case ultimately produced, and it did not come from a courtroom. According to the Marshall Project's reporting, in 2018, Tara Coronado moved to modify the custody arrangement again. She was armed this time with a fresh independent psychological report prepared by a professional named Murphy, who took a starkly different view of the case than the court-appointed evaluators who had previously diagnosed Tara with an array of conditions. Murphy's report, according to the Marshall Project, described what she characterized as an apparent bias in the prior evaluation against Coronado, noting that Tara's behaviors had been characterized in terms of what the report called gross psychopathology, while Ed Cunningham's behaviors and their impact on the family had, in Murphy's assessment, been largely glossed over. Armed with this new report and the deferred prosecution agreement, which, remember, court filings described as containing his written confession, Tara pressed forward. And then, according to the Marshall Project's reporting, Ed Cunningham did something that speaks volumes about what happens when the strategy of spending, delaying, and exhausting a woman no longer seems like it is working. He offered to settle. He agreed to give Tara nearly 50-50 custody of their children. The men who had, according to court records, been awarded primary custody of 3 children while their mother was restricted to 4 hours of supervised visitation per week, that men came to the table. And by the time the Marshall Project published its investigation in July 2020, 3 of the 4 children were living with Tara Coronado full-time. The 4th was living in an off-campus apartment as a young adult. The children came home. Not through a dramatic verdict. Not through a single moment of cinematic justice. But through years of grinding, painful, exhausting refusal to accept the lie that had been built around her. And what about the broader fallout? Because this story did not end with a family. According to the Austin Bulldog's reporting, the public fight over the secrecy of deferred prosecution agreements in Travis County, a fight that Tara Coronado and attorney Bill Alisher essentially forced into the open, revealed that the Travis County Attorney's Office had been signing DPAs at a rate of approximately 55 per month over a 42-month period in domestic violence cases. That is roughly 2,300 secret agreements, in which individuals accused of family violence admitted to the allegations, and then walked away with no public criminal record, in less than 4 years. In one county. In one Texas city. Tara's fight did not just win back her children. It cracked open a practice that had been shielding abusers from accountability in the dark, one quiet agreement at a time. And it sparked conversations among journalists, advocates, legislators, and victims across the country about what it truly means for a justice system to serve the people it claims to protect. Ed Cunningham has maintained throughout all of it that he never physically harmed Tara Coronado. He declined to speak on the record for the Marshall Project's investigation, though he shared certain documents from the case. He has told a court-appointed psychologist that Tara had a, quote, long history of making false allegations when she gets angry or does not get her way. His position and hers remain in conflict. But the record, the police photographs taken at 1 o'clock in the morning, the documented injuries, the arrest, the deferred prosecution agreement with its written confession language, the years of court testimony, the independent psychological evaluation, and ultimately the custody settlement that gave Tara back her children, that record exists. It is public. It has been reported by multiple credible investigative outlets. And it tells a story that is very difficult to explain away. What does this story ultimately say? It says that power is not always what it appears to be. It says that a man can stand 6 feet 7 inches tall, move in political and social circles, run a renewable energy company, campaign for Senate, and spend 15 years constructing a version of reality designed to protect himself, and still be found out. Not always the way we want. Not always in a single clean moment of justice. But found out nonetheless. It says that a woman who grew up in a trailer park in New Mexico, who served in the Peace Corps, who graduated from law school, who raised 4 children largely on her own, who showed up to a police station in the middle of the night with bruises and a broken sense of safety, that woman did not need the system to hand her justice. She built it herself, piece by piece, document by document, year by year. Tara Coronado did not win because she was lucky. She won because she refused to stop. And I want to leave you with something to think about. Because this story is not only about Tara. The attorney who stood beside her, Bill Alisher, took her public information case and received no fees from the settlement. The journalists at the Marshall Project and the Austin Bulldog spent years on this story without any guarantee that it would change anything. The domestic violence advocates who told the truth about what the evidence showed, even when a court-appointed psychologist was telling a different story, did not back down. Justice in this case was not delivered by one dramatic moment. It was delivered by many people, over many years, refusing to look away. Which brings me to the question I want to leave with you today: and I genuinely want you to answer this in the comments below. If you had been watching this unfold, as a colleague, a neighbor, a friend, a court professional, or simply a person who knew what was happening behind that stone wall in Bee Cave, Texas, what would you have done? Because the uncomfortable truth that this case exposes is that the answer to that question, multiplied across thousands of similar cases happening right now in family courts across this country, is what the difference between justice and injustice often comes down to. Not the law. Not the money. The people who decide whether to look away or not. Thank you for watching this story. If it moved you, if it made you think, if it made you angry in the way that important and true stories sometimes do, share it. Because Tara Coronado spent years trying to be believed. The least we can do is make sure people hear her.